This week's edition of NJBIA's Minding Your Business is brought to you in part by AT&T, helping family, friends, and neighbors connect in meaningful ways every day. New Jersey's community colleges, aligning education to build an innovative workforce. Find out how your business can benefit at njpathways.org. And by New Jersey Business Magazine, providing critical information needs for New Jersey's business community for more than 66 years.
Welcome to NJBIA's Minding Your Business. I'm Bob Considine. Well, the FY25 budget is in the books, and within the $56.6 billion package is a brand new $1 billion tax for New Jersey's largest and most profitable businesses. Here to discuss it all, having survived it all himself, is NJBIA Chief Government Affairs Officer Christopher Emigholz. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bob. Always enjoy being here.
Yeah, and congratulations on surviving it. You look like you came out unscathed, but
last week of June is always a challenge for everyone that's in the State House, but I think the business community had a tough last week of June this year.
Yeah. So before we get to this $1 billion tax I just mentioned, let's talk about $56.6 billion budget. What are your overall thoughts on it, good, bad, and costly?
Well, BIA tries very hard, as I testified to the legislature that night when it passed. We try to find the good in things. We try to find the balanced position. We try to find compromise. And a budget is an easy document to do that because it's full of good and bad. And I think last year, BIA testified that it probably was the most pro-business budget of Governor Murphy's administration. And unfortunately, that's not the case this year. And I think this is a bad budget. We've heard talk about how we're worried about the structural deficit. That gets worse. Yeah. We've heard talk that we're worried about revenues growing in the future. It's like, how is having the highest business tax in the nation, which we're now going to have, going to help with that? We've heard talk about needing cash, yet the legislature still added over $700 million to this final budget, which is not that different than the total amount of the CBT increase. And so if we we don't see any signs of structural reform or savings. It's a budget that's kicking the can down the road, and I worry that in a couple years, the next administration and future legislators are going to have a tough time dealing with our fiscal situation of the state.
Very interesting. So this 2.5% surtax on companies with a net income of $10 million. Can you just kind of go over the major points of why this is so problematic for the business community?
Well, number one, it hurts our competitiveness. We hear talk from some, these big businesses can afford it. That's one that's ridiculous. Who knows who can afford what, and what decisions have to be made within those budgets based upon this new expense that they have. But forgetting about who can afford what, we have the highest business tax rate in the entire nation at 11.5%. There is not a single state in double digits like New Jersey. 11.5, there's no one else is above 10. We're by far the highest in the country. That's going to lead to some corporate decisions that every single day there's corporations reaching out to their tax people saying, okay, what's our tax liability here? Do we get as much ROI, bang for our buck, in investing in this state versus other state, hiring 1,000 jobs in one state versus New Jersey, building a new capital investment in New Jersey versus another state? And the answer is, well, you're not going to be getting the same bang for your buck or ROI in New Jersey because of this. And we also, the competitiveness drives me insane because we have New Jersey right between Pennsylvania and New York. Pennsylvania, you had a Democratic governor a few years ago propose cutting their corporate taxes in half from 9.9 to 4.9. And the new Democratic governor has doubled down on continuing that. Then across the Hudson River on the other side of us, you have a Democratic governor that had legislators basically say we should look at increasing our corporate taxes in New York. New York is much lower than us, 7.25. They said, hey, maybe we should go to 9, the same as New Jersey used to be. And the governor rejected it, saying it'll hurt our job growth. And so you have Democratic governors on either side of us, and yet in the middle, we're saying, no, we'll have the highest in the nation. Right. That's tough to understand.
Yeah, well, they do say this is to fund New Jersey transit. Obviously, New Jersey Transit's got its problems. But should business, who maybe aren't even benefiting from this New Jersey Transit influx of money, should they be responsible for it?
Well, good question. And number one, BIA will never be on the record saying we do not think transportation is important. Investing in mass transportation, our transportation infrastructure is critical for the economy of the state, and that's a good thing to figure out how to fund that.
Right.
But by no means does that mean we support this. What I would say is, number one, NJ Transit, they need to get a better handle on what their true spending needs are. And go and audit the system and figure out, are there efficiencies they can find? Could we better make sure that this $1 billion investment is not going to be wasted? But number two is the crazy thing there. So they're calling it, they have the gall to call it a corporate transit fee.
Right.
Yet not a single dollar this year is going to go to NJ Transit.
Yeah.
So they're starting it off lying about what it's going for.
Right.
It's going to pad the surplus this year. Ultimately, the hope is that it gets to NJ Transit. NJ Transit's FY26 hole is to be in that $800 million range, which is what the corporate transit fee will bring in over time every year. Right. And so it does make sense to dedicate that for a few years for that. But we've been in New Jersey a long time. We know that unless you constitutionally dedicate a revenue stream for something that's important like NJ Transit, the chances of it continuing to go for NJ Transit, only NJ Transit, are limited. Yeah. And we can't count on that in the future. And that's disappointing, because business and transportation advocates can all get together saying NJ Transit's important, let's dedicate money for it. But I don't think this is the best thing to do for it, because number one, CBT is very volatile, up and down. And that doesn't make sense to say we value NJ Transit, so let's take a very up and down tax and give it to them. No. Number two, there's no other state in the nation that dedicates a state corporate tax to a state transportation agency. Number three is, and I think you referenced this, the lack of nexus, is that there are companies in South Jersey, Northwest Jersey, where there's no NJ Transit resources to speak of, and they're not benefiting in any way, and now they're going to be asked to foot the bill for it. There's companies that do have employees that benefit from NJ Transit, but they're actually already reimbursing those NJ Transit costs, whether it's an employee taking the bus or an employee taking the train to work. Well, they're paying for that, now they're paying double. Then you have employers that are, if you're involved with the airport, you're paying into the airport transportation system. Employers that are subsidizing other aspects of employees getting to work, which is all good, because employers want to take care of their employees. Right. But now you're saying, okay, this is going to be this extra hit, and you're paying for something that may or may not get to this important resource. And by the way, this is closing a budget hole, so it's not like NJ Transit is going to be doing a new train station or new bus lines or new train lines in South Jersey or Northwest Jersey or wherever they might be limited because of this. No, it's just making sure they at least can hold flat.
Right. And I was also thinking, I don't know how true this is, but some people use NJ Transit to go to work in New York, correct? So how is that helping us competitively to tax our businesses so folks can go across the river?
That is a little bit of a silliness of this policy, and that and not even just going to New York, is once you are an employee in New York, you're paying your income taxes to New York. So we are basically saying we want to make sure the New Jersey employers are paying into a system that is helping drive more income tax revenue to New York State and drive it from New Jersey. Right. I was like, you can't make that up.
And when you mentioned about a year ago, we were talking about a very pro-business budget. At that point, Governor Murphy was sunsetting what was a temporary 2.5% surtax, and this one is basically replacing it. Yes. I think the threshold's a little higher for who's going to have to pay it. But did that take you by surprise that the governor would do that kind of an about face on that?
It did surprise us because he had spoken to a BIA audience. He had spoken to other business association audience and chambers of commerce audience saying he was going to let it sunset and it's the right thing to do, and he explained why. And he was fantastic last year. Even leading up into the budget, it's not just a 2023 thing. In early 24, I want to say it was a week or 2 weeks before the budget address, he was on the radio and a reporter pushed him saying, hey, do you regret letting this expire? And he said, no, it's the right thing to do. Right. And just a week or two later, he's presenting his annual state budget, and he includes this that was not communicated well and not very transparently done to the business taxpayers that are going to be footing the bill. And I also like that, the business taxpayers, it's just kind of sticking on them for a moment. is, so now they have the highest in the nation this. If the sales tax revenue, which is one of the bigger parts of our general fund in our state budget, people are using their salaries from their employers, these corporations, to pay for sales tax. Income tax, where does that come from? It comes from these salaries that they're getting from the businesses. And so business community is footing the bill on sales tax, footing the bill on income tax, footing the bill on obviously corporate tax, which directly goes to us, but also property tax is the highest in the nation. If you're a small business, it's often the highest tax you pay. And so we have this unrelenting tax atmosphere where we're high across the board and all this stuff. And there's obviously not an acknowledgement of that, because now we're taking something that we're already high. We would have been the 4th highest in the nation. And now we're saying, no, that's not good enough. Let's be number 1.
In order to fund New Jersey Transit, we need to have the highest corporate tax in the nation. How about, Chris, in terms of concessions? I know you were kind of looking for mitigations for this tax. Where did they land?
We were disappointed in that. BIA being realistic, we knew that this at some point it was going to happen. We didn't like that, but we don't want to be pie in the sky and not actually ask for, hey, if you do this or this, you can make it a little bit better, a little more palatable. So there were 3 things we asked for. Number 1, we had asked for it to be temporary in 5 years or less, which they did that. Now, we don't know if the temporary truly would be temporary when it comes up in 5 years, but at the same time, that just saying it's temporary in statute does have tax benefits and balance sheet benefits to our corporations. And so that was something that we do appreciate. But then the other 2 asks, number 1, we pushed hard that it shouldn't be retroactive. That seems very punitive. And this talk of fairness, which drives me insane talking about fairness, but it does seem unfair to say for a company that's already paid their taxes the first half of 2024, already budgeted for those taxes paid, to now go back and say, okay, you now got to re-report your income those first 6 months.
So go back to January 1st.
Yeah, go back to January 1st. And this is the FY25 budget, so let's just have it focused on FY25 and beyond. But no, we're going back into actually FY24 to claim some extra money. And then again, this desperate need for cash. Well, if we needed that much cash, 1, this is one-time only cash. This is non-recurring cash. We're talking about fixing a structural issue in the state. A retroactive tax increase does nothing structurally because it's one-time only. And so why are we doing this? And then if we needed the cash so bad, the retroactive tax increase doesn't actually get you as much money as the spending they added on in the budget at the last minute.
It doesn't make any sense.
It does not make any sense. And the third mitigation was probably the most disappointing to me, because it was a little bit of a more complicated idea, but the old surtax that expired and previous surtax the state has done did not allow the use of tax credits to be applied towards it. So you had companies with their liability was on the 9, but the 9 had tax offsets and credits and benefits. And then you had liability in the 2.5, which was more of a gross tax with no write-offs on it. And that made the 2.5 sometimes very costly, much more costly than you would think when you think about 2.5 versus 9. So we said, hey, at least if this has to happen, allow the ability to write off your research and development tax credits, which is a big tax credit that New Jersey makes available. EDA tax credits, if you invested in low-income parts of the state, that you can get back some of that money. And our understanding was the legislature pushed for that, and ultimately it wasn't in the final budget and wasn't in this final bill. We were disappointed because we heard it was looking good on that, and for whatever reason, it's not in the final version, and it's something that I think we'll continue to work for in the future.
Yeah, and I know you had heard, you relayed to me that there were a lot of people in the legislature who did not like this bill, and whether they, the corporate transit fee, and whether they voted for it or not. A lot of them who did vote for it, they did it with, this is not a great thing, and some others didn't vote on it, or they voted against it, correct?
Yeah, no, I was happy to see it was certainly didn't get 80 and 40 votes in the legislature. It was not a unanimous vote by any stretch. Every Republican that was there voted no on this bill. And you had a good mix of Democrats vote no on this bill. I think you saw some South Jersey Democrats, you saw some Democrats in more competitive legislative districts in the state, some of the more moderate pro-business Democrats in the state did the right thing and voted no on this bill. So the business community does appreciate that. And so we were happy to see that there was bipartisan opposition to this bad tax that people know is bad policy.
Lastly, Chris, I know BIA called it, I wrote some of the descriptions down when they kind of the reversal on this was an about face, a flip-flop, a broken promise from Governor Murphy. Some in the legislature called it a betrayal, which we did not. But looking forward, how do you see the business community, NJBIA, working with the administration, given this about face going forward the last year and a half of his term?
Well, obviously we're disappointed, and we hope that we can get to a place where legislative leaders and the administration see that having the highest taxes in the entire nation is not good for our economic growth. And let's get to a place where we all can think about, this is how do we grow jobs, this is how we attract capital investments in New Jersey, and if we're doing that, it's going to lift everybody up. And so hopefully we can get to that place. But we also seen the Murphy administration has had great ideas on innovation, great ideas on workforce development. We've been happy to partner with them and the legislature on some of these pro-business investments. And can we get back to that in the last year and a half of the Murphy administration, and get back to that, maybe some new ideas to shore things up for the next governor, whoever that may be.
Right. Well, you did a great job. I have to say, folks, if you don't know Christopher Emigholz, the guy's the most positive guy you're ever going to find. When we go around the office, Vin, you could back me up on this, is if there's a dead battery in the office, he'll just touch it and it turns positive back away. So we do appreciate all the work you did and for the business community, and it was a great job.
No, thank you, Bob.
All right, we'll see you next time, all right?
Thank you, definitely.
All right, we'll be back right after these words.
Calm before the storm? No, thank you. This is Jim's time to shine. And Mike's. And Jennifer's. Helmets? Check. Drones? Check. Checking that thing we just checked? Double check. We ain't got time to chill. We're out here driving this thing. This is when we get to work. To keep you connected. No matter what. Connect before the storm. Change how we weather them. Connecting changes everything. AT&T.
Welcome back to NJBIA's Mind Your Business. I'm Bob Considine. Well, for businesses and residents, regulatory programs at the State Department of Environmental Protection can sometimes be a challenge. So a panel at NJBIA's recently held Environmental Regulatory Conference featured a host of former DEP leaders and what advice they would offer to create more efficient and effective regulatory programs. Have a look.
We've done a really good job, but to everyone else's point, we've never taken anything off the plate. And not only rules not being repealed, but we don't even peel back process, because we get really entrenched in doing what we do and not letting go. And I think Ray and Michelle touched on it a lot this morning with land use rules. When I worked for Irene, in part of the transformation processes that a lot of you probably remember at the start of the Christie administration, we talked about trying to streamline processes, and there was a lot of emphasis being put on permits by rule and general permits, which became permits by certification. And I've had many, many debates with my land use colleagues, which I did spend a long time in the land use program, so I worked with them really closely on why we did not need to review these things, because they were the low-hanging fruit, the catchphrases that everybody uses. We didn't need to see these. We need to apply our focus somewhere else. We needed to be more holistic and look at cross-programmatic issues and solve bigger problems so that we can evolve. As the problems became new, we needed to be able to adapt and go into those problems. And I think if we look around today, whether we're talking about an overburdened community or environmental restorations, you have to look at nets, and we have to be able to look across media lines. And there's always been pockets and opportunities, efforts, and so I'm not saying that I was successful or any of us. We've seen permit coordination, we've seen alternative dispute resolution, we've had great opportunities. Bill Lindner is here today. He ran the Community Collaborative Initiative, where we really tried to get people from the grassroots perspective and understanding what communities wanted, and then try to pull the media together to make net gains. But it's not DEP staff, it's not DEP management, it's the entire system's responsibility, in my opinion, because we look at it from a legislative perspective down, that there's a new standard put on, but there's not that flexibility to think about the net impacts. Ray touched on some of them this morning. If we're talking about land use, and now we're going to have stormwater impacts, and is that going to prevent us from doing a brownfield redevelopment that really could improve a community? And the answer is yes, it's gonna. And we've had so many of those issues. Irene talked a lot about, or touched on, site remediation, but I had a few issues myself, actually, when I transitioned from enforcement to NHR. I brought along with me a couple of really significant water issues. And the fly in the ointment there was we had a historic preservation issue. So when I was in enforcement, I found myself kind of arguing with Rich Bornasian and some of the other people at Chippo. And then when I moved over to that side, I got to understand it. And I think that we need to get to the point where we empower staff, have them think more holistically. We do want programmatic experts. People need to be like the experts in their field, if they're an air person or a water person or a remediation person. But we need to have a greater understanding of the holistic nature of what we do to find those net gains. There's cause and effect to everything. Nothing is perfect. And I think that we need to try to instill that as we go forward.
I wanted to say one more thing, because we talk about all the different programs that haven't been taken off the plate. We talk about institutional memory and institutional memory leaving the department. What we really need to focus on is new staff, next generation staff, next generation ideas, and more importantly, next generation IT. There is so much that could be done by the push of a button that does not need 25 eyes on them, 25 sets of eyes on them. We have to make sure that it's required. We did it in, I think we did it in OPA, but we definitely did it in Site Remediation Act. Electronic. That's outdated. You know, we need to look at AI. We need to look at some way of taking things off the plate and saying, this is going to go that way, and technology and new growth and new environmental issues have to be handled a completely different way.
I'm going to make things even harder, because all we're doing so far in the last 45 minutes is talk about the DEP. One of the things that I'd like to just raise the fact that the DEP at times doesn't participate well with others. So you've got the DOT, you've got the EDA, you've got the DCA, you've got all those critical functions, and not only do the new folks we have to bring in the DEP to train folks up need to work well with the other divisions within DEP, well, at times they need to know how to work with the DOT. They need to deal with affordable housing issues and balance these priorities of public policy. At times, I think working in DEP, you feel like you're, kind of at a really complicated Thanksgiving dinner with family, where, most of the year we don't get along, but there's times you kind of come to the table and you get along. I had a consigliere that worked for me essentially when I came into the department as a fresh person, a fresh set of eyes in the water program. And he kind of gave me the key code of who used to be married and who's married now. And that's not really it's a weird environment at times, honestly, to operate within. You really need to kind of have the key code to relationships. But it gets even harder when you're talking about, how does DOT get along with DEP? My last job was working for an organization that focused on transportation and infrastructure, water infrastructure contracts. And there's times I had to introduce senior leaders of DEP to senior leaders of the DOT and facilitate conversations between them, because the leads of the organizations at times don't get along very well, and they're kind of working at cross purposes at the time. So I think we also have to build a culture at DEP of being open to the idea that the environment is not the only priority. We have to have the economic development priorities met and the community priorities met. And sometimes that means, gritting and bearing it and moving forward. So the state is going to be releasing a state plan. The DEP is one of many members of the State Planning Commission. One of the things I did before I worked for state government, I worked for county government and local government, and I chaired my planning board for too many years. So I think so. You have the silo, the vertical silo of the DEP. You got the horizontal relationships between the departments, but you also have that layer of how does the state policy interact with local government policy, and that town's plan and zone for whether it's industrial land or commercial or residential or other park uses. Think about how hard that is to them when the DEP is not coordinated, the agencies aren't coordinated, and then you've got pressure on a mayor, and that's, I think, some of the heart of some of the big giant NIMBY issues we have in the state, is that kind of really confusing and lack of state policy planning tool, like a state plan, to say, all right, well, this is an area where our priority is to grow, and we're going to grit and bear it, and we're going to let that growth happen and do it in a really well-designed way. So I think some of these failures are not just failures of DEP, but the failures of state government since the 70s and 80s to balance priorities like growth and housing and transportation and infrastructure, because no one's done it well. This is not this administration or the last administration or the one that'll come next. I don't think any administration, they've taken like the real planning tools from the 80s, of the State Planning Act, the Fair Housing Act, and some of the infrastructure planning tools we've had, and really melded them together and worked with local government effectively to really see a real good future.
So I want to say I agree in large part with everything you guys said. Dan, I think you nailed it with the planning parts of this, right? I think as you guys embark on this wonderful adventure.
Did you tell everybody your name? And
Sean Moriarty, former deputy commissioner. I was 3 months ago. I think it's easy for folks who deal with the department from a regulatory perspective to see the department as a problem, right? And I would encourage, as you go through this, and I would love to participate to the extent that you would invite me to, for us to work to find root causes of these things, right? And I don't think all the root causes of what we're talking about exist within 401 East State Street, right? And you talked about needing a governor, you talked about planning, we talked about the legislature, right? Like, I think we have to have a real conversation about institutions and how they function, and the state government as an institution and its overall functioning. Because what happens, and what I've seen very recently, is the department ends up feeling like it is pitted against everyone else when you're talking about affordable housing, when you're talking about these other things, because, like you said, Chris, there is a series of statutes and regulations that they are required to implement. They are required to administer every single day. And what happens is, because of a lack of planning, because of a lack of leadership, and because of a lack of clarity of vision, the affordable housing project comes in, and it's in a floodplain, and then DEP is in the way, right? And what they're really trying to do is their job, right? So you have an institutions and institutions plural that just don't work, right? And from a DEP perspective, I want to do all the things you guys said, and if I had an opportunity to do all of those things, I would have, right? But there are not enough people to even sit down and think about the planning that's necessary to implement AI, to plan, to do all the things you're suggesting. That sense of urgency, right, that we want to see, and I agree with you on that. Like, that urgency, people are running around every day with their hair on fire, trying to get something out the door because it has to get out the door, right? So the time to take a breath, to step back, to lead, to come up with new ideas, that is frankly very, very rare in my most recent experience, right? And I think that that's something we really got to focus on. And you got to think about, as a business community and as all of us, like, where are we going to invest and what are we going to invest in? And if DEP is a restraint or a constraint on the progress you want to see, then you have a conversation about how you invest in that. I don't think the regulatory structure is going away, right? As Gary said, how many laws get repealed? So if we're going to deal in this highly regulated arena, how are we going to invest in that to make it work for everybody?
All right, thanks for those participating in NJBIA's recently held Environmental Regulatory Conference. Thank you to our producer, Vinny Civitillo, and thank you for joining us on NJBIA's Mind Your Business. We'll see you next time.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly dreaming left its scenes while I was sleeping. And whispered in the sound of silence.
about the benefits of membership at njbia.org.